Hi, good morning or good afternoon. I'm Kristen Coleman. I am a program specialist here at the State Department in the Special Education Office. And I also have with me Angela Kwok, who is also a specialist at the State Department in the Special Education Office. Thanks for joining in our webinar today. I'm sure you guys know we are starting a new webinar series. We have dates from now until the end of December, and hopefully it will be every other Wednesday. So today is our first one. Most of the webinars will just be geared towards how to write a compliant IEP and stay in compliancy with different areas of our IEP. Okay. Our first one is Introduction to Individualized Education Programs.
And today we're going to talk about several different items. When we're talking about an IEP, there are several different pieces that come together, and a lot of acronyms are used in special education, and we just wanted to clarify some of those terminologies. So we have the first one of F.A.P.E, and we know that as a free and appropriate public education. We're also going to talk about Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE. We're going to also talk about the contents within an IEP, the expected components, required team members, and those team members' roles and responsibilities, and finally, just an overview of the entire IEP process itself.
Okay, we'll start with the free appropriate public education, which is F.A.P.E. All students with an individualized education program are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. Special education and related services are provided at public expense, under public supervision and direction, and in accordance with an IEP designed to meet the child's unique needs. This includes students who are eligible for special education from the ages of 3 through 21. F.A.P.E. is individually determined for each student with a disability and must include special education in the least restrictive environment and may include related services, transition services, supplementary aids and services, and or assistive technology or devices and services.
Sometimes you may have a student that comes into your district and you're considering what type of program might be appropriate for that student. And that's when we talk about the least restrictive environment. So your school district might say, oh, well, we serve all of our students with special education. We serve them in the general education setting. And so that's the kind of services that we offer here. We don't have anything else. And when you're saying that, you have to rephrase your statement because that is not appropriate. All services must be afforded for students on a continuum. It's the decision of the IEP team to what extent is appropriate for that student to be having that instruction in a general education setting, or whether it is more optimal to have the student receive services in a special education setting. So yes, to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are included in the general education setting, but it's not a decision for all students. So be very careful when you use that language of it's our district's policy that all students are included in the general education setting. No, it's not. The entire IEP team makes the decision about the appropriate least restrictive environment for that student. So when it is appropriate to remove a student because of the nature or severity of their disability, then that team decides the extent appropriate for the amount of services, what type of services, the frequency, and the time of those services that would be afforded for that child.
Okay, what's included in the IEP? Okay, a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, including how the child's disability affects his or her involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum, a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals, and a statement of the special education and related services and supplementary aids and services to be provided to the child on or behalf of the child.
So, Kristen, I'm going to ask you, what is the present levels of performance?
The present levels of performance are academic measures that have or skills or functional level within the last year.
So does that mean like I can use my, I can't use my 3-year reevaluation information and I have to use another one?
Yes, you'll have to do some benchmarks or screeners to get a more, what word am I looking for?
Maybe more relevant?
More relevant, yes. More current, yes.
Okay, so what we're saying is you don't have to do the entire battery of evaluation every three years, but you do want the most recent evaluation information and then any other relevant academic information that is within the past year, because that's very helpful for determining present levels of performance. Far too many times we're seeing IEPs of a high schooler that has present levels of performance of how they performed in 2nd grade. Well, that does not paint a clear picture on that student's ability levels, so we want some current present levels to know and gauge that measure of understanding for that student. When you're thinking about elements to include in an IEP, you are including a statement of program modifications or supports for school personnel. So if that includes the direct needs or services that special education support personnel will assist with, that would be included in that section as a narrative. You can also have a statement of what type of training that individual may need in order to perform that specific task. You know, if they're going to be walking the student down to the nurse's aid station because they're going to be measuring their glucose levels for a diabetic, you know, whatever those needs or supports are, it's different and unique for each student, and so that's why it's a narrative in that section so that it can be specific to supports for school personnel. We also note to the maximum extent appropriate when we want students offered access to the general education setting, but in some circumstances we know that that's not appropriate. So when it's not appropriate, there needs to be an explanation of why it's not appropriate for that student. And so there'll be an explanation in that section of the services section of an IEP that the student will not participate in their regular education classroom. And then finally, a statement of any individual accommodations that can include class activity accommodations and state district assessment accommodations. That is necessary to measure the academic achievement and functional performance for that student. So accommodations offer an opportunity for students to have access to the general education setting. And we were looking at data from last year about accommodations and whether students were afforded some accommodations on state or district-wide assessments. And if a student is a student with a disability, a lot of times an accommodation is a means of accessing that content for that particular assessment. So we highly encourage you to take consideration of the accommodations that are afforded for students, because one of those accommodations may benefit that student from accessing that curriculum. It's not a measure of providing an area for them to gain access because it provides them an advantage. That's not the purpose at all. It's equaling the playing field so that they have a means of accessing the curriculum. It's very similar to glasses. Not every person needs glasses, but for those who need it, it's quite beneficial.
Okay, our next slide is IEP team members. You'll see that some of them have a little asterisk by them, that those are the required IEP team members. The parent or the adult student, special education teacher and provider, the regular education teacher of the student, an administrator or administrator rep, a related service provider when appropriate, the qualified examiner, your school psychologist or psychometrist, to interpret evaluations, the student when appropriate, the transition representative when age appropriate, and other representative at the discretion of either the parent or the school district. The IEP should be discussed and developed by a team of people who know and work with the student. This team is responsible for the development and implementation of the IEP. Other team members can be added as circumstances warrant, but always remember that the parent needs to be invited, the special education teacher, a general education teacher of the student, an administrator or admin rep.
Right, and for high school students, when they have multiple regular education teachers, you may want to have this regular education teacher that works most with the student's area of need. So if they're really struggling in math, maybe have the Algebra 1 teacher come to be invited to the meeting so they can provide input on the students, how they're doing currently in that classroom. The other thing is, when you are considering inviting IEP team members to that meeting, we want to make sure that the entire team is there for the duration of the IEP meeting. It's not okay, I'm just collecting signatures now. I know you have a lot on your to-do plate. No, this is a specific time, one time that this team collectively meets and determines the appropriate services and supports for that student with a disability. So all team members, there are required team members that need to be present for that meeting. The team member roles and responsibilities include several different factors. So the first one is knowing where to access the confidential records. Sometimes it might be an online program, but we highly encourage you to use paper documentation because that provides the actual signature, any kind of form of documentation used prior to the electronic format of records, and it also provides a means of anyone accessing those educational records outside that online program is very helpful. So you want a record of access form to know who has accessed those records. And then when a parent makes a request to access those records, of course you're providing the opportunity for them to have access to those records when they request it. They also provide input at team meetings. It's very important that those required team members are present because they're going to facilitate a conversation with how the student is progressing in his or her curriculum. That leads us to the next one about whether current goals or accommodations are appropriate or whether they need to be revised. We also encourage regular communication with the parents and the IEP team because you don't want the first contact with the parent to be a negative experience. So right now, we highly encourage you to build those relationships with the parents. Give the parent a phone call. I know sometimes it may be, nerve-wracking for you if you're just starting the position and you're like, I don't know what to say to a parent. They're probably going to just, yell at me. No, don't think of it that way. Think of yourself, if you were a parent, you would want to know how your child is progressing. So just, engage in a conversation by extending yourself and saying, hey, I'm new to this position. I'm going to be joining teacher this year. I noticed from the goals we're going to be working on this. And so, just let me know if you have any concerns. Here's my name and contact number. When you're building those strong relationships, when there are experiences where you need to reach out and address a behavior matter, then the parent has built that relationship with you already, that they don't immediately become defensive. Also, a team member has the right to request an IEP meeting at any time. So we know that an IEP is required at least annually, and so the due date will be 365 days after the initial date of the IEP meeting. But at any time, if there is some concerns, an IEP team member can request another meeting. And then another important responsibility is providing input on the student's present levels of performance. And when we mean present, we mean current data and documentation.
Okay, IEP Decision Making. The IEP meeting serves as a communication vehicle between the parents, the school personnel, and other IEP team members that enables them as equal participants to make joint informed decisions regarding the student's special education services. I know a lot of times us as teachers or administrators, we want to go in and say this is what our plan is going to be, this will work best for your student, and sometimes we don't always listen to what the parents' needs are. So we really need to take the time, get their input, and include that on the IEP as well. All members of the IEP team are expected to work toward consensus regarding the services and educational placement that will be included in the student's IEP to ensure that he or she receives a free and appropriate public education. Consensus means that all members are in general agreement regarding what is written. If full agreement cannot be achieved, provide the comment form and offer the individual a right to a due process form.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's very important that those decisions for that student are made on a team level. So if there's any kind of considerations that need to be hammered out, where you just need to have internal dialogue first going into the meeting, you may want to make sure that that information is uniform, so that as a district you have an idea of what type of services to offer the parent. You're not predetermining services, but you're going in as a unified front to have a collective and purposeful and meaningful collaboration time with the parent. When you're talking about an IEP, it's a very specific flow. So you first begin by making parent contact, identifying a date and time that's mutual agreeable for the separate parties. So the meeting is scheduled. If it needs to be rescheduled, there's some information of how to notify the school district if that date doesn't meet that time. You develop the IEP, provide services, determine whether those services are appropriate, accommodations, goals, report on the development of those goals, and then revise the IEP annually.
Okay, schedule the meeting. The primary purpose of an IEP team meeting is to design an IEP that meets the unique needs of a student with a disability. The IEP is individualized, and all IEPs should not look the same. The parent must be invited to the meeting in order to meaningfully participate. The parent should be informed of his or her role as a team member. The parent, LEA personnel, and other IEP team members should come prepared to discuss specific information about the student's individual needs and type of services to be provided to address those needs.
Yeah, it's really important that when you're having those discussions that a regular education teacher comes in with being prepared of maybe current work samples or accommodation effectiveness, so that those conversations are very meaningful. When you're writing a meeting invitation, it can be known also as a notification of meeting. It's just affording the parents an understanding of the mutual date and time of the meeting, the location, and also maybe what the purpose of the meeting might be. In one district, they make sure to give parents appropriate, sufficient prior notice of when to anticipate those meetings, and so they require that all meetings for IEP meetings and 3-year reevaluations are scheduled right now in August, so that everybody on board can map those out and make the appropriate arrangements to be present for those dates and times of those meetings. And that way timelines are not missed, because we don't want to be in non-compliance because an IEP meeting has lapsed. Those due dates are very critical, and we want to make sure that those are adhered to. We also want to make sure that everybody knows the date, time, and place of those meetings, where they will occur, and contact information if the parent is unable to attend.
Okay, when developing the IEP, the team must consider the child's strengths, parents' concerns for enhancing their students' education, results of the initial evaluation or the most recent evaluation that was done, and the child's academic, developmental, and functional needs. You can also determine their academic needs through various screeners and district benchmarks, and the developmental and functional needs can be assessed through consistent teacher observations and collecting data.
When considering an IEP, match the classroom and assessment practices to a written explanation of what is happening in the classroom. If anyone outside of your school district is reading the IEP, they should be able to immediately look at it and identify the appropriate services and supports necessary for that child according to what that IEP team has decided. Because that's a living document, and whatever the team has decided has been placed on that document, and those are the services that would be expected to be offered for that student. Inform the parents and other service providers how the team has decided to address the student's needs. Again, that will be documented in that IEP. And then you're using language that is clearly understood by everybody. So if you're using acronyms, those are spelled out. If you're using SS as a standard score, put it in the context of what would be reasonable for a standard score for that student in that age range or grade level.
Okay, we have 3 areas that connect together in an IEP, and that is Those are our present levels, our annual goals, and our services and supports. They are all interrelated. One drives the other. For instance, evaluations can include data that addresses their academic needs, functional needs, transition needs, offers a baseline to see how far away a student is from a standard. The goals developed address a student's needs and specified target for improvement, and what is the rate at which the progress will be measured. And our services and support includes services supporting the student to progress towards the goal, services supporting the student to progress in his or her general education, and promote student access with non-disabled peers.
3 types of IEPs would be the first initial IEP, when the student becomes initially eligible for special education services. The team has an eligibility meeting. After the team has determined that the student is eligible for special education services, an initial IEP will be developed within 30 calendar days. Another type of IEP would be an interim IEP. So that means if a student is coming into you from another district and there's not enough information, or you're not exactly sure what type of services to afford that student, then an interim IEP can be developed so that the existing information that would be required, so maybe more evaluation results or seeing what type of services would be best for that student. It's just a temporary IEP that lasts no more than 30 calendar days so that the team can consider services. Typically, most likely, your major types of IEPs would be your initial IEP and your subsequent IEP, because a student is initially eligible, and then after that, a subsequent IEP is developed at least annually and can be offered to parents to have a subsequent IEP anytime that it would be requested.
Okay, we have listed several different resources that exist to assist with IEP's development. And our first one that we have down is our special education section of it's on our State Department website, sorry. And if you go to School Age Part B, because that includes children ages 3 through 21, and there's several different areas you can click on to choose, but one of the most helpful ones is that technical assistance button, and that will take you to our policies, our handbook, and our special education process guide.
We also have several different special education resources. One of the highlights we would like to suggest would be professional development found in our online special education program of OK Ed Plan, and that is called Pepper. So you can access Pepper modules. There are several different options of modules that the state has paid for, so you can go ahead and access some of those modules. There are additional modules that are available, but some of them do cost an additional fee. We do have IRIS modules, and several of those are free to use. You just access the IRIS Peabody Vanderbilt website, and you can have access to those really great modules. We also have the State Department of Education Special Education Services has developed PowerPoints, and you can access those on our professional development webpage. And those are just PowerPoints that are just ready to use, and you can download those. Also, we have agencies that support us in our initiatives, and we have the Oklahoma Parent Center, and they have a resource center or even their lending library that may be of interest. And finally, we have our Assistive Technology Center, which is called AbleTech, and they have several different resources for students who may need assistive technology, or even just that initial consideration of whether assistive technology would be necessary for a particular student.
Okay, this is just stating that we will continue our webinars at the same time, the 11 to 11:30 or 11:45 to 12:15 every other Wednesday, now through December the 12th. Next webinar is September 12th, and it's going to be over present levels of performance.
This presentation has been uploaded to the main menu page of OK Ed Plan. On the main menu page, if you go down, the very bottom is a section called Documents. You can look at that document section and identify the State tab. and everything that has been developed by the State Department of Education, whether it's a PowerPoint, a link to a webinar, an external document, we try and upload those resources to the very bottom of OK Ed Plan. And that's exactly where you will find the PowerPoint for this information today.
And there's our contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, there's our phone number there at the bottom, 521-3351. And you will be directed, according to what your question is, will be directed to the appropriate specialist to help you guys out. And that's all we have. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Can't find my button.
I think we moved your button.